I served in the Administratum's Departamento Munitorum for 43 years before I understood what golden armor truly meant. Not glory, not protection, certainty. The absolute certainty that some things in this universe remain constant while everything else churns and breaks and bleeds. I was a secondary logistics coordinator, 7th tier, assigned to void freight manifests for a sector I never visited, tracking materiel I never saw, ensuring ships I would never board carried cargo to wars I would never fight. My entire existence was numbers on data slates, approval stamps on parchment, the steady rhythm of a quill scratching its way through requisition forms that stretched back centuries. The Administratum complex on Severan Hub was my world. 14,000 souls working in a Gothic cathedral of bureaucracy where the windows had been bricked over 3 generations ago, and the air tasted of old paper and recycled breath. The day everything changed began like any other. I arrived at my station at 0500, lit the devotional candle at my desk's small shrine, whispered the litany of accurate accounting, and began reviewing overnight Vox transmissions. My cubicle was positioned in sub-level Gamma, row 87, desk 4216. The glow globes overhead had been flickering for 6 months, maintenance requisition pending, estimated response time 14 to 18 months. I had learned to work in the strobing half-darkness, had learned to find a strange comfort in the inconsistency. Around me stretched an ocean of identical desks, staffed by identical functionaries, all of us processing the Imperium's endless hunger for resources, all of us converting human suffering into numerical abstractions that could be filed, cross-referenced, and forgotten. The first anomaly appeared in a shipping manifest from a fortress monastery I will not name. The document itself was unremarkable standard resupply request, the kind that crossed my desk 3 or 4 times a week, but buried in the 4th subsection, among listings for ammunition, nutrient paste, and machine oil, was a line item that made no sense. The request specified golden ceramite plating, the kind used exclusively for one purpose in all the Imperium. But the quantity was wrong. Not a maintenance shipment or a replacement order. This was enough material to outfit 500 warriors in full plate. The fortress monastery in question housed perhaps 30 of the Emperor's Golden Guardians at any given time, if my understanding of their deployment patterns was correct, and my understanding was based on 43 years of processing exactly this kind of data. I flagged it. Standard procedure. Sent the query up through channels, a simple request for clarification. Then I returned to my other work, to the 17 other manifests requiring review that morning, to the comfortable tedium of my purposeful existence. But the query came back rejected, not denied, rejected. The difference is crucial in Administratum terminology. Denial means a superior has reviewed the matter and found it unworthy of action. Rejection means the query itself is inappropriate, that I had overstepped bounds I should not have approached. I had never received a rejection in 43 years. My record was pristine, my efficiency ratings consistently above minimum requirement, my loyalty beyond question. I lit my candle every morning, I spoke the correct prayers. I filed my reports in triplicate. I should have stopped there. The wisest course in the Administratum is always to accept what cannot be changed and move on to the next task. But something gnawed at me. A splinter of wrongness lodged in my mind. That night, after my shift ended at 1900, I did not return to my HAB unit. Instead, I descended deeper into the archives, into the sub-basements where older records molded in climate-controlled darkness. I had clearance for these levels. Technically, though few bothered to use it. Most information was digitized, stored in cogitator banks. But the oldest records, the ones from before the current reorganization 3 centuries past, remained in physical form, paper and parchment and vellum, boxed and labeled and forgotten. It took me 4 hours to find what I was looking for. Cross-referenced manifests from fortress monasteries across a dozen sectors, spanning the last 2 years. The pattern emerged slowly, but once I saw it, I could not unsee it. Golden ceramite shipments, all of them oversized, all of them flagged and rejected when questioned, all of them continuing despite the irregularities, and alongside them, other anomalies. Gene seed storage containers requisitioned in unusual quantities. Bolt weaponry calibrated to specifications that didn't match standard Astartes patterns. Power field generators of a type that should have required Mechanicus authorization but bore no such approval marks. My hands trembled as I copied the relevant information onto my personal data slate. The archive chamber was cold, had always been cold, but now the chill seemed to seep into my bones. The glow globe above my reading station buzzed, a sound like insects trapped in glass. Dust motes drifted through its pale light, and I watched them fall like tiny worlds descending into darkness. I thought about those golden warriors, the ones I had glimpsed perhaps 3 times in my entire life, always at a distance, always terrifying in their perfection. The Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's own guardians. 10,000 gene-forged demigods who had stood watch over the throne world for 10,000 years, who had never faltered, never wavered, never shown anything but absolute loyalty to him who sits upon the golden throne. What could they possibly need with enough material to outfit an army? I returned to my desk the next morning, determined to forget what I had found. Self-preservation is not cowardice when facing truths too large for one insignificant human to contain. I would process my manifests, light my candle, speak my prayers, and let greater minds worry about greater matters. But when I arrived at my station, I found it had been searched. The disturbance was subtle. My data slates aligned slightly differently, my ink pots arranged in the wrong order, the stack of pending requisitions riffled through and imperfectly restacked. Someone had been through my things while I slept. Over the next week, I noticed more irregularities. Shipments I had flagged for review suddenly disappeared from my queue, reassigned to other coordinators whose names I didn't recognize. Vox transmissions that should have reached my desk were intercepted before arrival, leaving gaps in the daily data stream. And then there were the visitors. 3 times that week, men in charcoal grey robes appeared in our sublevel, men who spoke to our overseers in voices too quiet to hear, men who would pause beside certain desks and make notes on brass data slates. They never approached me directly, but I felt their attention like heat from a distant fire. On the 8th day, my supervisor, a woman named Harakat, who had occupied the same position for 60 years, called me to her office. The room was small, windowless, lit by a single glow globe that cast her face in harsh shadows. She did not invite me to sit. "You've been asking questions," she said. "Not an accusation. Statement of fact." I began to form a denial, but she raised one age-spotted hand. "Don't. I've reviewed your access logs. I know what you've been researching." She paused, seemed to age another decade in the silence. "I'm going to give you advice I should not give. Go home, light your candle, say your prayers, process your manifests, and stop thinking about golden armor." "But the irregularities," I started. "Are above your clearance," she interrupted. "Are above my clearance, are above almost everyone's clearance in this entire complex." She leaned forward, and I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear, the kind I had only seen once before when a fire had broken out in sublevel Delta and we had thought the entire archive might burn. "There are truths in this Imperium that will kill you for knowing them, not because anyone particularly wants you dead, but because the machinery of secrecy operates independent of malice. It simply crushes whatever gets caught in its gears. Do you understand?" I nodded, but I didn't understand. Not then. I understand now. I tried to follow her advice. For 3 days I was a model functionary. I processed manifests without question, approved shipments without review, maintained the steady rhythm that had defined my life for 4 decades. But on the 4th day, a new manifest arrived, and this one could not be ignored. It was a troop transport authorization for a full company of custodian guard, 300 warriors to deploy from Terra itself to a sector on the far edge of Imperial space. The destination was listed as a frontier world of no particular strategic value, a place so insignificant I had to cross-reference 6 different stellar cartographs to even locate it. The authorization bore 17 seals, including 3 I had never seen before, sigils that suggested involvement by officers I did not know existed. 300 custodians, moving together, away from Terra, away from the throne world they had guarded for 10 millennia. The number was incomprehensible. In all my years processing military deployments, I had never seen more than 5 or 6 of them authorized to move as a unit, and those only for the direst emergencies. 300 was not a deployment, it was an army. It was an invasion force. I sat at my desk, staring at the parchment until the letters seemed to crawl across the page like insects. Around me, the administratum complex continued its endless work, 10,000 quills scratching, 10,000 voices murmuring prayers and curses, 10,000 souls feeding the machine that kept the Imperium functioning. The glow globe above me flickered in its irregular pattern, and I found myself counting the strobes. 12 seconds of light, 4 seconds of darkness. 12 seconds, 4 seconds. A rhythm that had once been comfortable now felt like a countdown. That night, I made a decision that would define the remainder of my life. Instead of returning to my HAB unit, I went to the Vox Communication Center in Sub-Level Alpha. I had access, technically, though at my tier such access was meant only for emergency use, for situations where standard channels had been compromised or destroyed. I told myself this qualified. I told myself I was fulfilling my duty to the Emperor by reporting an irregularity that could not be explained through normal procedures. I told myself many lies that night. The Vox operator was a young man, perhaps 30, with the augmetic implants common to his station receptor nodes at his temples, a Vox grill where his mouth should have been, eyes replaced by sensor clusters that glowed a dull red in the chamber's darkness. He looked at me with those inhuman eyes when I entered, and I saw my reflection in their lenses, a small figure made smaller by Gothic architecture that loomed above us, stone angels and skulls carved into every surface, the omnipresent eagle of the Imperium spreading wings across the vaulted ceiling. I need to send a priority communication, I said, to the Inquisition. His mechanical voice crackled with static. Authorization code? I gave him a code I should not have possessed, one I had memorized years ago from a document that had crossed my desk by mistake, a code that should have been purged from my memory immediately, but which I had kept, stored away in some paranoid corner of my mind, against a day I never thought would come. The operator's eyes flickered as he processed the code, and for a moment I was certain he would refuse, would call security, would end my life of quiet service with a single alarm. But instead, he gestured to a Vox unit in the chamber's corner, a brass device crusted with wax seals and purity marks, and stepped back. 10 minutes, he said. Then I must report this use to my superiors. I sat before the Vox unit and composed my message. I kept it brief, factual, stripped of emotion or speculation. I detailed the irregularities in golden ceramite shipments, the unusual requisitions, the troop deployment authorization that made no sense. I cited manifest numbers and authorization codes, provided cross-references and supporting documentation codes. I signed it with my name, my position, my 43 years of loyal service. Then, I sent it into the void, and waited for a response that would either validate my concerns or condemn me as a fool. The response came 36 hours later. Not through official channels, not through any communication I could have anticipated. It came in the form of 3 men in storm grey armor who arrived at my desk at 0300 in the morning, who seized me without explanation, who dragged me from the administratum complex through corridors I had never seen before, through passages that descended far deeper than any sub-level I had known existed. I did not struggle. Struggling would have been pointless. These were not arbitrators or enforcers. These were soldiers of a type I had only read about in classified reports, warriors whose existence was itself a secret, whose armor bore no insignia, no marks of allegiance, nothing but smooth grey surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They brought me to a chamber that was all stone and shadow, lit by candles that burned with flames the color of old blood. An interrogation room, though it lacked the instruments of torture I had expected. Just a chair, a table, and across from me, a figure in a high-collared coat whose face remained hidden in the shadows cast by his wide-brimmed hat. An inquisitor. Not the one I had tried to contact, I suspected, but one who had intercepted my message, who had deemed my information worth investigating, even if my survival was not. "You have stumbled onto something that will kill you," the inquisitor said without preamble. His voice was surprisingly gentle, almost paternal, which made his words more terrifying than any threat could have been. Not because you deserve death, but because the information you carry cannot be allowed to spread. Do you understand? No, I said, and it was the truth. I was only performing my duty. I saw irregularities. I reported them through proper channels when those channels failed. Proper channels? He laughed, a sound like wind through a graveyard. There are no proper channels for what you have discovered. There is only silence, and the enforcement of that silence. He leaned forward, and I glimpsed his face, or what remained of it, scarred tissue and augmetic implants, a mosaic of flesh and metal that suggested a lifetime of suffering in service to the Emperor. I will tell you a secret, functionary, and then you will understand why you must die. The Custodian Guard are preparing for a war, not against the Imperium's external enemies, not against Xenos or heretics, or the demonic. They are preparing for a civil war, a schism within the golden ranks themselves. The words made no sense. I repeated them silently, trying to force them into a context where they could be real, but they slipped away like water through my fingers. That's impossible. The Custodians are incorruptible. They are the Emperor's own Crestring. Nothing is incorruptible, the Inquisitor interrupted. Not when you exist long enough. Not when you watch an empire crumble for 10,000 years. Not when you stand guard over a corpse and call it a god. He stood, began to pace, and I noticed he walked with a limp, favoring his right leg. There are factions within the 10,000, not many. Perhaps a few hundred at most. But they have come to believe that the Emperor would not want this Imperium, would not want to see humanity chained by dogma and ignorance, would not want to watch his dream become a nightmare. They believe they know his will better than anyone, and they have decided to act on that belief. Act how? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. By seizing control, by removing those they deem responsible for the Imperium's corruption, by reshaping the machinery of governance in the Emperor's image, or at least in their interpretation of that image. He stopped pacing, turned to face me directly. They are gathering forces, recruiting allies among the Astartes, among the Navy, among elements of the Mechanicus who share their disillusionment. The materiel you noticed was part of this effort. They are arming themselves for what they believe will be a righteous purge, what will actually be the bloodiest civil war since the heresy. I thought of those golden warriors I had glimpsed, remembered their perfection, their absolute certainty, tried to imagine them divided, fighting each other, and failed. Who else knows? More than you would think. Fewer than should. The Inquisition has been monitoring this for 7 years. We have agents embedded, information networks in place, contingency plans prepared, but we have not acted because we do not know what acting would accomplish. How do you stop the Custodian Guard? How do you fight the Emperor's own angels? He returned to his seat, and the candles guttered as if responding to the weight of his despair. You cannot. All you can do is try to contain the damage when the schism finally breaks open. Try to ensure that the Imperium survives what is coming. Then why kill me? I asked, if so many already know. Because you are not one of those who needs to know. Because every additional person who carries this secret is another vector for its spread. And if this information reaches the general population, if the citizens of the Imperium learn that the Custodians themselves are divided, the psychological damage alone could shatter worlds. He drew a las pistol from his coat, placed it on the table between us. I am going to give you a choice, functionary, a kindness I should not offer. You can die quickly, a laser bolt to the skull, painless and efficient, or you can accept a different fate, memory erasure, psychic reconditioning. You will forget everything you learned, return to your desk, live out your remaining years in ignorant contentment. The procedure is not pleasant, and there is a 30% chance it will leave you a vegetable, but it offers survival. I stared at the weapon, thought about 43 years of service, of candles lit and prayers spoken, of manifests processed and duty fulfilled, thought about what it meant to be a functionary in the Imperium of man, to be a number among numbers, significant only in aggregate, valuable only as part of the machine, and I realized that I had never really been alive. not in any way that mattered. I had existed, had consumed resources and produced output, but I had never made a choice that was mine alone, never acted independent of regulation and procedure, never been anything but what the Imperium required me to be. I choose memory, I said. The Inquisitor nodded as if he had expected this answer. Then, you will die knowing more than most. I suppose there is some dignity in that. He stood, gestured to the soldiers who had remained motionless by the door. Make it quick. And dispose of the body where it won't be found. I don't want questions about a missing coordinator. They took me to a different chamber, deeper still, a place where the stone walls wept moisture, and the air smelled of rust and old blood. I knelt where they indicated, felt cold metal press against the base of my skull, and had one final moment to wonder if I had made the right choice. To wonder if 43 more years of ignorant service might have been better than knowledge and death. To wonder what would happen to the Imperium when the custodians finally split, when the Emperor's finest turned their weapons on each other, and the galaxy watched its last symbol of certainty crumble into civil war. Then I heard a voice, and everything changed again. Stop. The soldier behind me stepped back. I turned, saw a figure entering the chamber, a woman in golden armor so bright it hurt to look at directly, her face stern and ageless, her eyes the color of winter storms. A custodian, here, in this secret place. The Inquisitor had frozen, one hand moving slowly toward his weapon, though we both knew such a gesture was futile. Tribune, the Inquisitor said carefully, this is not your concern. This is an inquisitorial matter. Everything that threatens the throne world is my concern, she interrupted. Her voice was quiet, conversational, but it carried absolute authority. She looked at me, and I felt my soul laid bare under that gaze, felt every secret and lie and moment of weakness exposed. You contacted the Inquisition about irregularities, about golden armor and strange shipments, about deployments that made no sense. Yes, I whispered. And they brought you here to kill you. To silence what you had learned. She turned her attention to the Inquisitor. Tell me, servant of the throne, what exactly did you tell this man? The Inquisitor's face had gone pale. Only what was necessary to. You told him of a schism, of rebellion among the 10,000, of civil war coming. She smiled, and it was not a kind expression. You told him lies wrapped around a core of truth, hoping to frighten him into silence or death. But you were wrong about one thing. There is no schism coming. There is no rebellion being planned. She paused, and in that pause, I heard the universe hold its breath. There is only us, only the 10,000, and we have already decided. Decided what? The Inquisitor asked, though I could hear the fear in his voice now, the understanding that he had made a terrible mistake, that the Imperium is dying, that the rot has gone too deep for any cure but fire, that the Emperor would not recognize what his realm has become, would not want this nightmare to continue in his name. She looked at me again. You asked what would happen if the Custodes rebelled. You are about to find out. The next moments were chaos. The Inquisitor drew his weapon, managed to fire 3 shots before the Tribune moved. I had never seen anything move that fast. One instant, she was standing at the chamber's entrance. The next, she was beside the Inquisitor, her guardian spear removing his head from his shoulders with a single precise stroke. The soldiers by the door tried to react, but they were too slow, too human. They died before they could scream. Then there was silence. Just me and the Tribune and 3 corpses leaking blood onto ancient stone. She cleaned her weapon with a cloth produced from some hidden pocket, the gesture almost meditative, then regarded me with an expression I could not read. You should be dead, she said, but you have served the Emperor faithfully for 43 years. You light your candle every morning. You speak the correct prayers, and you noticed what others chose to ignore. She sheathed her spear. The Imperium rewards such service with death and silence. We will reward it differently. How? I asked. By giving you the truth, by allowing you to witness what comes next, by making you understand that what we do not out of betrayal, but out of loyalty to an ideal that this Imperium abandoned millennia ago. She gestured toward the chamber's exit. "Come. There is much to see, and little time remaining before the storm breaks." I followed her because I had no other choice. We ascended through passages that seemed to shift and change around us, through corridors that could not possibly exist within the administratum complex I knew. Reality felt thin here, as if we were walking through a dream or a memory. Finally, we emerged into a chamber that took my breath away. It was vast, cathedral-sized, its ceiling lost in shadows far above, and everywhere, there were warriors in golden armor, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, all standing in perfect formation, all awaiting orders, all absolutely silent. "This is not all of us," the tribune said, "not even most, but it is enough for what must be done." She led me to a raised platform where I could see the full scope of the assembly. For 10,000 years, we have stood guard over a corpse. We have watched the Imperium decay, watched its institutions calcify into instruments of oppression, watched its people ground into dust beneath the weight of dogma and ignorance, and we have done nothing, because our duty was to protect, not to rule, to guard, not to govern. "What changed?" I asked. "We received a message. From him." She said it with absolute certainty, with a conviction that brooked no doubt. The Emperor spoke to us, not in words, not in visions, but in feeling, in understanding, in a moment of perfect clarity that came to every custodian simultaneously, regardless of where we stood or what we were doing. He showed us his will, showed us that this Imperium is not what he intended, that it has become a prison for humanity rather than its salvation, and he commanded us to act. I wanted to disbelieve her, wanted to dismiss this as madness or heresy or some cruel joke, but standing in that chamber, surrounded by 10,000 years of loyal service made manifest in golden armor, I found I could not. These were not rebels. These were not traitors seeking power or revenge. These were warriors who had dedicated their existence to a single purpose, and who now believed that purpose required them to destroy everything they had spent millennia protecting. "When?" I asked. "Soon. Within days. We have made alliances with certain Astartes chapters who share our concerns, with segments of the Navy who understand what is coming, with Forge Worlds who will provide the weapons and supplies we need, and with elements within the administratum itself, men and women like you who have seen the truth and chosen to act on it." She looked down at the assembled warriors. "It will not be clean. It will not be quick. There will be bloodshed on a scale the galaxy has not seen since the heresy. But when it is done, when the rot has been burned away, we will rebuild. We will create an Imperium worthy of the Emperor's vision, an Imperium where humanity can thrive rather than merely survive." "And if you're wrong?" I asked. "If the Emperor did not command this? If you're interpreting silence as instruction?" She smiled again, that cold, terrible expression. "Then we will be the greatest traitors in human history, and we will deserve whatever damnation awaits us." She placed a hand on my shoulder, the weight of it enormous despite her careful gentleness. "But we are not wrong. We cannot be wrong, because the alternative, continuing as we are, watching humanity's slow extinction, maintaining a rotting corpse of an empire that serves no purpose, but its own perpetuation that is unacceptable. Better to risk damnation than accept that certainty." The chamber began to empty as the assembled custodians departed, presumably to their assigned positions, their prepared roles in the coming conflict. The tribune remained beside me, silent, and I realized she was giving me time to process what I had learned, to come to terms with my new understanding of the universe. "What happens to me?" I finally asked. "You return to your desk, you process your manifests, you light your candle and speak your prayers, and when the storm breaks, when you see golden armor fighting golden armor in the skies above Terra itself, you will know that you were present at the beginning, that you witnessed the moment when the Emperor's guardians chose defiance over obedience, action over patience, revolution over stagnation." She removed her hand from my shoulder. "You will live long enough to see whether we succeed or fail, and you will carry the knowledge of what we attempted, regardless of the outcome." 1. Why tell me any of this? Why not just kill me and be done with it? Because you represent what the Imperium has become, a functionary so thoroughly integrated into the machine that you cannot imagine existing outside it. A loyal servant who has sacrificed everything: ambition, family, joy, hope, in service to an institution that barely acknowledges your existence. She turned to face me fully. If we can show you that change is possible, that even the 10,000 can choose a different path, then perhaps there is hope for the Imperium itself. Perhaps it can be remade into something better than what it has become. They returned me to the surface before dawn, deposited me in an alley 3 blocks from the administratum complex. I walked to my desk in a daze, lit my candle out of habit, spoke the litany of accurate accounting without thinking about the words. My data slates were exactly as I had left them, the glow globe above flickering in its irregular pattern. 12 seconds of light, 4 seconds of darkness. The rhythm that had defined my life for 43 years. But everything had changed. I processed my manifests that day, knowing what they really represented: not abstract numbers, but human lives, suffering and struggle and desperate hope encoded in logistics and supply chains. I saw the Imperium clearly for the first time, saw its monstrous inefficiency, its casual cruelty, its willingness to grind millions into dust for marginal advantages in endless wars. And I understood why the custodians had chosen rebellion, not out of ambition or madness, but out of a desperate love for the humanity they were sworn to protect. The days that followed were ordinary on the surface. I went to work, processed my documents, returned to my hab unit each evening. But I watched the news feeds with new attention, looking for signs of what was coming, and I saw them, if you knew where to look: unusual troop movements, naval deployments to unexpected locations, Forge worlds suddenly cutting communications with Mars, small anomalies that would mean nothing individually, but which collectively suggested a vast machinery moving into position. 3 weeks after my encounter with the Tribune, it began. The first reports were confused, contradictory. Fighting on Terra itself, golden armor in the streets around the Imperial Palace. The Custodian Guard engaging not external enemies but each other, spears and swords and bolters turned on warriors who had stood together for 10 millennia. The Voxnets went wild with speculation and panic. Some claimed it was a false flag operation by Chaos infiltrators. Others insisted it was a training exercise gone wrong. But those of us who knew the truth understood what was happening. The schism had finally broken open. Within 48 hours, the fighting had spread beyond Terra. Astartes chapters declared for one side or the other, ancient rivalries and philosophical differences suddenly given new urgency. Navy battle groups engaged each other in void battles of unprecedented scale. Forge worlds divided, Mechanicus adepts fighting over control of weapons and resources. The administratum itself fractured along lines of loyalty and ideology, with functionaries suddenly forced to choose between the Imperium they knew and the promise of something better. I chose the latter, not out of belief in the Tribune's vision, but because I had seen the truth of what we were. The Imperium was a grinding machine that consumed human potential and produced only suffering. If there was even a chance, however small, that it could be remade into something better, then that chance was worth supporting. I began sabotaging logistics shipments, redirecting resources away from loyalist forces and toward the rebellion. Small acts, easily disguised as clerical errors or innocent mistakes, but across the administratum, thousands of functionaries like me were making similar choices, and collectively, our small acts had enormous impact. The war lasted 3 years. 3 years of the most brutal fighting the Imperium had endured since the heresy. Whole sectors burned, hive cities became charnel houses, navy ships turned on each other in battles that left debris fields spanning light minutes. And at the center of it all, the Custodian Guard fought themselves, gold against gold, perfection against perfection, each side absolutely certain of their righteousness. I survived by luck and insignificance. My role was too minor to attract attention from either faction's purges, and the fighting never reached Severan Hub in force. I continued my work, continued my sabotage, and watched the galaxy tear itself apart over competing visions of what the Emperor would have wanted. In the end, neither side won. Not really. The rebellion was crushed when elements of the Grey Knights intervened, their psychic might tipping the balance against the rebel custodians. But the damage had been done. The Imperium's aura of invincibility was shattered. Citizens across 1,000 worlds had seen the Emperor's guardians divided, had witnessed the golden armor stained with blood of its own kind. The psychological impact was devastating. Entire planets declared independence. Chaos cults flourished in the resulting instability. The Imperium survived, but it was weakened in ways that would take centuries to repair, if repair was even possible. The Tribune died in the final battle, fighting alongside her rebel companions in a last stand that was already legend before it ended. I saw the picked captures afterward, golden armor shattered, blood pooling on marble floors, the faces of defeated warriors showing not regret but a strange peace, a satisfaction at having tried to change an unchangeable system even though they failed. The loyalist custodians hunted down every rebel they could find, executing them without trial or mercy. But they could not execute the idea. They could not erase the knowledge that even the 10,000 could doubt, could choose, could rebel. That certainty itself was an illusion, that nothing in this universe remained constant, no matter how much we wished it otherwise. I am writing this 40 years after those events, in my HAB unit on Severin Hub. By the light of a candle I still light every morning out of habit. I cannot break. I am 87 years old, far past the average lifespan for a functionary of my tier, and I will not live much longer. The Inquisition never discovered my role in the sabotage, or if they did, they decided I was too minor to pursue. I have spent 4 decades processing manifests, lighting candles, speaking prayers that now feel hollow in my mouth. Was the Tribune right? Did the Emperor truly command the rebellion, or did 10,000 years of isolation and duty drive his guardians to madness? I will never know, but I know this. I lived through the moment when certainty died, when the Imperium learned that even its most perfect defenders could fracture, when humanity glimpsed the possibility of change, however briefly, before that possibility was crushed beneath the weight of institutional inertia. The glow globe above my desk still flickers. 12 seconds of light, 4 seconds of darkness. The rhythm continues, unchanging, marking time in an empire that has lost its way but cannot imagine any alternative. I process my manifests each day, smaller numbers now, less important shipments. The wars continue, the suffering continues, the grinding machine continues its work. But I remember golden armor fighting golden armor. I remember the Tribune's certainty that change was possible. I remember the moment when the Imperium's greatest defenders chose rebellion over compliance, and I carry that memory into whatever darkness awaits, knowing that I witnessed something that should have been impossible, knowing that if it could happen once, perhaps it could happen again. The candle burns. The pages turn. The Imperium endures, wounded but alive, certainty replaced by doubt, stability replaced by the gnawing fear that maybe, just maybe, everything we believe is wrong. And in the darkness between the glow globe's stuttering cycles, I sometimes imagine I can see golden armor moving in the shadows, warriors who should be dead preparing for a war that will never end, fighting for an ideal that this Imperium abandoned millennia ago, but which refuses, somehow, to die. The certainty is gone. All that remains is the flickering light, and the endless dark, and the knowledge that nothing in this universe, remains constant forever, not even the Emperor's own angels.